Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
Surely there is so much to be grateful for in this feast. We have so much, but as soon as you start talking like that, the darker side has to come into the picture, because as you're sitting there talking about it, a face of a youngster in Ethiopia might just flash before your mind.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Father Chuck Ritter, Director of the Office of Community Relations for the Catholic Diocese of Toledo, discussing the celebration of Thanksgiving in a religious perspective. Now, here's Father Bacik.
Chuck, since you're one of the busier people I know in the whole world, I'm especially appreciative of you coming in. I suppose I ought to let you catch your breath, since you've just been running in from one other meeting. Sometimes I have the feeling you spend your whole life running between meetings.
That's not totally true, but a lot of it.
Your job, I think, takes you to many functions like that. So I am grateful that you've taken some time out here to speak a little bit. And the topic that's on my mind is that generally of gratitude, and more particularly of our national celebration of Thanksgiving. I'd like to speak a bit about gratitude to begin with. I'm flashing on a scene. An atheist friend of mine once told me that when he heard of the birth of his son, he just fell down on his knees spontaneously. And it just lasted for a few seconds, and he talked about sort of an overwhelming feeling of gratitude that welled up inside of him and came forth. And he told me that in this kind of context, that he didn't really understand it, that it was a very mysterious thing to him. And I thought to myself, one of the sad things about that kind of situation is that one wouldn't know who to direct the gratitude towards, or at least that would be part of my analysis of it, that here's this gratitude, and one is trying to think, well, to whom am I grateful? So as it raises for us the whole religious question that revolves around this idea of gratitude. But it's that thing that I would think would perhaps set this context for dealing with Thanksgiving. I find myself, the virtue of gratitude seems to me to be a healthy one. I mean, I think that we appreciate it when people say thanks to us for the ministerial jobs we do, or perhaps when we feel it in ourselves, gratitude to others who help us, and so on. You feeling anything about that whole idea of gratitude?
Yes, and I'm relating it to a very specific thing of just within the last couple of weeks. A close friend and classmate got the word that what they found in one of his internal organs was not cancer. Mm-hmm. And I can identify with that spontaneous welling up of something in the way that it takes us out of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that those experiences that we all have of spontaneously encountering something, it's a surprise, it's expected, but it's something good, and it takes us out of ourselves, and it's not really gratitude in the sense it focuses in on me and all the good things I have, but it kind of takes me out of myself and opens me to other people, to just, it makes my world bigger than just me.
I like that, the opening out idea, and it really does raise the religious question. I mean, in today's culture, we have to figure out where language about God might fit. We can't just assume that everyone knows what God is or talk about God. And so one place it might fit is right within the context of a sense of gratitude, because we really do have to ask ourselves for the great things of life, for abundance, for health, for opportunities, and so on. If we feel gratitude, to whom are we addressing that? We really do have to open that question up. And of course, for us, out of our Christian context, we like to say, well, that is to God. God is the source of those gifts. All good gifts come from the Father, as we like to say. And so it really does for us locate what we might mean by that word God. God simply points to the fact that much of what we know in life is a gift. There's a gift dimension to the whole of life, sort of an undergirding notion that much of what we have we simply don't have coming. We didn't earn it. There's no reason why we should have such abundance. Gratitude seems to be a proper kind of thing, and it does relate us then to the religious question of God.
I think for me, too, as I look at some pieces, of our own culture, that focuses on what we have gained by our own efforts, everything from the whole progressive movement across the country of the 19th century of settling the land, of developing the tremendous technological and industrial thing that we have, we focused on what we have accomplished as values, and yet our deepest sense of gratitude tends to be around those things, not that we have accomplished. We look at those with pride, but we look at some other kinds of things with gratitude, and pride and gratitude, I think, are can coexist very well.
Yeah, I like that distinction. I think you're right. I think the gratitude comes from something like health, as your example.
It was not my doing. It's a gift.
Right. That's right, a gift dimension. Well, I think that this is a nice place to locate our whole Thanksgiving celebration. I believe there is a lot of ambivalence around this celebration, good things and bad things, but there is a dominant religious sense that happens at Thanksgiving. I think it's rooted in our whole culture, really. I mean, going back to the beginning, was it 1621, where the Pilgrims gathered with the Indians and had a 3-day celebration, and after the severe winter and then the harvest. That seems to me to be a really healthy kind of thing. It had a nice communal dimension at the beginning. What a beautiful opening scene, in a sense. The harmony of the settlers with the Indians, and thanking the Great Spirit or God for the harvest. And I suppose it's that still sticks in our memory and imagination as we contemplate what Thanksgiving is all about. That's that story of the Pilgrims that becomes part of our national heritage, really.
And I suspect that the Pilgrims themselves put that sense of gratitude spontaneously in a religious framework in a way that the Indians may have in terms of their own religious framework, or may not have all. The idea even that gratitude is a bridge builder. People can relate to that as common ground, even though they don't necessarily express it in the same terms. There was a unity, I think, in that event, as kind of the tradition passes it down in American history. That didn't mean, that the Indians could now understand it because they had been converted or something like that. No, there was a shared sense of gratitude, and it was a bridge builder.
Much more primordial kind of experience that undercuts the different ways that one articulates it. And that really stands in such sharp contrast again to the later treatment of the Indians. I mean, all the way through, as I analyze this idea of Thanksgiving, you see an ambivalence built in. I mean, there's beautiful imagery of deep religious sentiment, I think, and at the same time there's other more demonic kind of forces. And so when you look ahead and think of the treatment of the Indians after that, it's a sad part of our whole history, and we think of wars and reservations and the situation of the Indians today, destroyed as a culture in so many ways, and individuals hurting as a result. So right as you begin to start thinking about Thanksgiving, you get this positive, negative side by side.
And as a matter of fact, if you create enough of a sense of conflict between, be it cultures or nations or whatever, you end up only being able to celebrate a sense of gratitude in the sense of kind of thank God that we're stronger than they are, or better than they are, or we won the last battle, and it's a totally different framework. I would imagine that the Thanksgiving celebration in 1621 from the point of view of the Pilgrims, and the Thanksgiving celebration in 1876 by the remnants of the troops that took on the Indians at the Little Bighorn was very different.
Very different, yeah.
Very different.
A sharp way of saying that, Chuck. Yeah, I think so. I'm all the way through our history, our presidents and state legislatures have proclaimed the notion of having a national day. I think it was in 1789 that President Washington said we should have a national day of prayer and gratitude to God. Interesting that there was an important woman involved in this in the 19th century, a woman by the name of Sarah Joseph Hale, editor of a widely read woman's magazine, and she was pushing a lot for this idea of having this National Day of Thanksgiving. And then it was in 1863, President Lincoln invited all the citizens to observe the last Thursday of November as a National Day of Thanksgiving, and to quote, to give thanks and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens. So they've always had that idea that there was a religious side to this. And just as I'm saying that, the ambivalence comes back to me again. I'm thinking about the fact that I think it was in the 30s, this was a little vague to me, when there was a lot of question about when we would celebrate Thanksgiving, when the major contributions came from the world of the corporate world, the business world, that said, well, let's keep it as far away from Christmas as we can so as to be able to extend the buying period and so on. So right where we're sitting here talking about Lincoln and this great idea of let's give thanks to the beneficent creator for all we've received, then there's that other notion that, well, it's got a secular side to it of buying season and so on. We get so much of that these days, I suppose.
I think that just the endurance of and the appeal of the idea that, yes, doing something called Thanksgiving, has, been able to, in 1863, they're talking in the middle of the Civil War, that began, a sense of the need to do that, and that cutting through, where we're at as a nation, cutting through even the fight over how early the Christmas buying season comes. Nobody's ever suggesting, well, why don't we drop Thanksgiving so that we can get into the Christmas buying season? There's a sense of something in us needs to express gratitude, and that seems to have a power to almost a transcendent kind of thing that does override, some very practical considerations.
I think that when you think of the way we celebrate Thanksgiving today, I contrast it with the Christmas celebration very often, because I think that there's a way in which Thanksgiving has a sort of purity about it, of authentic religious sentiment. It's done, you think of families traveling to, like my sister will be driving in from New York this year, bringing her whole family. That's a big, difficult trip for her and so on. And yet it seems important to her and to us to be together as a family, and that's so typical of many families. I think it's a time to be together. I think the fact that we celebrate it mainly around a meal rather than gift giving has a power. The meal has always been a great ritual, a way of bringing people together, of showing fellowship. The very passing of food and so on seems to bring people into more harmonious relationships. Very often families have their traditions around it. There's the special foods and so on, and that is done over the years, and that helps to root us, it seems to me, in a tradition. Very often I think at Thanksgiving time people try to pay more attention to others. I think the whole business of stopping the world for a while. I sense a more leisurely pace around Thanksgiving than we do in Christmas time. Christmas is so harried, and sometimes you wonder if people could ever stop and think about the deeper religious meaning. But Thanksgiving's slower paced. We're off work, gathering with families, and it does seem to me to have a really genuine, authentic religious side to it.
And even given that its origins, both for the Pilgrims and I think even with Lincoln, would have been in a somewhat Christian religious framework, I think the openness of that basic idea of gratitude, and I think we experience it that way nationally each year, is that folks who are coming from no particular religious background or a specifically non-Christian but other religious tradition are able to lock into some pieces of that. And perhaps even, we that come at it from a specifically Christian perspective need to not make it somehow the private property of those who look at it from a Christian perspective. It's not a Christian feast in the same sense at all that, for instance, Christmas is.
That's right.
It is deeply related to some things that we from that perspective would look at, but if somehow we try to appropriate it simply on the terms that was its historical origin, then we do no one any service.
That's right. We wouldn't need to. It is a bridge-building day
Very
where
much.
all of us in our own way can give thanks. Now, I'm thinking of relating this to church services. Now, I don't think there is really a lot of church activity on that day. It's almost all family-centered thing. But one of the interesting things in our Catholic community now, I suppose, is the growing idea of having Mass on Wednesday evening beforehand, and people coming, and I think a lot of parishes have them bring canned goods for the poor at that time and so on. That seems to me to be sort of a healthy development, a way of making it be symbolized from our own perspective anyway. But on the day itself, I don't think there is a lot of church going. We used to try to have services that were always very poorly attended, as I recall.
There's something about the inherent process of preparing a Thanksgiving dinner that says getting everybody off to a 9 o'clock morning Mass is not going to work very well.
The mother of the family cannot be there.
Mother definitely vetoes that idea. What I've not, and I'm just trying to reflect back on the experience here in the Toledo area over the years, I don't know that there have been a lot of efforts to bring together folks across differing religious and other kinds of dividing lines to do community kinds of celebrations. There have been some religious things, and those have tended to happen on Wednesday evening. There have been some community-wide kind of, for instance, Thanksgiving Day, like dinners for the low-income community and that. But in terms of any real effort, say, in an area of the city or with something other than church as a focal point to bring people together around that common spirit of gratitude, maybe it's an area we need to explore more.
Yeah, we in the West Toledo cluster of churches, we've been trying to do that of late. And in fact, we do have a Thanksgiving service coming up at Covenant Presbyterian church Wednesday evening at 7:30 before Thanksgiving, and we've done that before. We don't get massive numbers, but it's a nice gathering for the clergy and for the people who show up there. So it does seem a very good way of doing it, a proper ecumenical spirit that would be involved in all of that. You know, Chuck, as we're talking about this, I've been trying to take a very, recognize the ambivalence of the feast, and surely there is so much to be grateful for in this feast. We have so much, but as soon as you start talking like that, the darker side has to come into the picture, because as you're sitting there talking about it, a face of a youngster in Ethiopia might just flash before your mind. And it raises this whole question of how we relate in the total world community. I mean, here we are in the United States with this tremendous abundance. What are we, 6% of the world's population? We consume something like 40% of the world's resources. That's a commonly stated statistic. I take it to be generally true, and even if it's a little skewed, it still represents the clear fact that as a minority on this planet, we have so much. And it seems hard to enter into Thanksgiving and to look at it in any clear-eyed way without seeing this major problem. So much of the world simply doesn't live like we do, and that problem just has to be addressed as we would think about the deeper meaning of Thanksgiving.
I think that very sense of a sense of gratitude, somehow being able to move us out of ourselves, maybe make us more sensitive. Maybe even it's one of those cases where being made uncomfortable is a gift. I had a similar thing. I was involved in a program at one of the local hospitals the other day, and someone afterwards was saying just that kind of thing, that they're looking forward to, and planning Thanksgiving dinner was being colored by what they were reading in the newspaper, specifically on Ethiopia, and a sense of feeling a little guilty, and yet knowing that guilt maybe wasn't an appropriate feeling, but some sense that they could not simply build a little psychological fence around themselves and their experience of the good things in their life and sort of pretend that the rest of that world wasn't there. I think that even just the awareness of our own situation in the United States vis-a-vis that of many nations in the world, even if it's an uncomfortable awareness, it can be a benefit in doing something other than guilt feelings with that, to accept some sense of responsibility, that it is our world, that while it's an extremely complex world and most of us feel not exactly, in the driver's seat of what makes the world tick the way it does, that ultimately the world is what the people in it make of it. And if this is an occasion that sensitizes us to the fact that, as you say, there's a tremendous discrepancy between, much of the good things that we would have, before us around Thanksgiving and the life situation of millions of people. The other thing that I have found is just in a limited experience I have had of talking with people who are themselves natives of third world countries or who have spent any time there, the way in which the sense of gratitude for some extremely simple, fundamental things is also a part of the life experience of those people. And to not only talk about, gee, how good we have it and how poor the people in Ethiopia or Bangladesh or someplace like that have it, but to also talk about, the kinds of things that if they were observing a national day of gratitude, they would find things to be grateful for in their experience, and that it's a bridge builder.
That's quite remarkable. There's a number of things that you mentioned in there I'd like to pick up on. One is probably the destructive character of guilt. I'm not sure that that's the right emotion to have in this situation. I mean, at a personal level, I mean, it really isn't our fault that we live in this abundance, and we were born here and grew up here, and that seems to be the situation.
Again, we can't claim credit for it. It's part of why we experience it as gift. We also can't experience guilt for it.
I believe that's correct. And it does seem as though we need a way of understanding this whole situation. I like the notion of interdependence, one of the ideas developed by Pope John the 23rd, among others, that helps us to see that we are interdependent as a nation. Much as individuals, we have to interact with communities and other groupings of people, and we find our identity in that interaction. So as a nation state, we are part of a larger world community. And I don't think that we've really gotten to that point yet. I mean, nationalism is so strong that it is difficult for us to think of ourselves as inhabiting spaceship Earth. I remember Joseph Campbell, the great teacher on mythology and so on, an expert on the world's myths, saying that when we went out into space and can look back at the Earth through the TV camera, that nothing would ever be the same, that we would not forever after think of ourselves differently as co-inhabitants of this spaceship Earth, as having a common destiny. I don't know that that's really touched in the way Campbell thought it would. I think it does represent the deepest truth, that there is a common destiny to the whole human family, that nationalism isn't the last word, that we are first of all citizens of the global village, as we like to call it these days. But we really have not gotten to that kind of point. If we really did reach that, then our attitude towards third world countries and the poor wouldn't be just one of saying, well, we are have all this abundance, we will dole it out to you. That would be a much more of a personal kind of sense, I think, that part of our human family here is suffering, and we can learn from those people. They have deep sentiments that they can speak to us about. They have values that would enrich our own culture, and there's ways in which we are responsible also for them and for their well-being. I suppose there's moments in our history, and I think when the news reports began to break on Ethiopia, I think it was sort of a breakthrough moment. Churches around the country found people much readier to give to that. The organizations that were in charge of collecting the money and so on have found it difficult to keep on top of all of the contributions being made. And there's this worldwide outrage, in a sense, that we can't get the food to those people because of governmental red tape and all of that kind of thing. Well, what I'm suggesting by all of that becomes a breakthrough moment when the meaning of Thanksgiving would really be extended, and there would be this moment of kinship with those poor people in Ethiopia. Not that they're the only ones suffering in the world, but it's certainly graphic at the moment.
It's another thing that has struck me for some time that's unique to our American experience, and it's not specifically a religious experience at all, but it's certainly an experience of the American history, is that we moved over the period from 1621 to maybe 1863 at the proclamation, from looking at our own immediate world in the Americas as predominantly membership and citizenship in state colonies and then states. I'm from Pennsylvania, Virginia, etc. To being a nation. We moved the primacy from the colony to the national unity in our own experience, not without struggle, and it took some time, but we did that. For someone today to say, I am first and foremost a citizen of Ohio, and then only secondarily do I belong to something called the United States, we'd see that as absolutely absurd. And we, in a sense, have lived through the paradigm of what has to happen in the world community.
Marvelous
it may be a unique,
insight,
kind of thing from our American history.
Oh, I find that very insightful, Jack. I like that very much. That's right. We do have a model then for what we want to do in the world as a whole, going from nation states where we would be so caught up in our own identity and so on, and then beginning to transcend that. That's good. Of course, the problems and obstacles involved in doing this on a global level are so much greater, but we do have a genuine sense of that. Thanksgiving is interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. The other I was going to say is, talking earlier, the difference between a sense on Thanksgiving, the different kind of feelings and kind of stance that you get from the two phrases, I am proud to be an American, which is certainly a valid statement for any of us to make, but to also say I am grateful to be an American. There's a different package there, and to somehow to be in touch with both of that. What America represents is in part a result of the way that millions of people have worked to build something, but it is also in part gift, and that either half of that without the other may not open us to the rest of the world in an ideal way.
Yeah, that's helpful, and I think the second half of that, the gift dimension, would raise up an element of the gift. Much of what we are really grateful for is precisely our freedom in this country, the opportunity to develop, to be able to go to the voting booth and to have something to say about our governmental structure or the governmental operations policies. That really is a gift. It's a more spiritual kind of gift. It plays itself out in a political realm, but I mean, we have a free spirit in this country. We have the opportunity to create, to develop, to go our own directions, to make innovations and so on, to start new businesses and so on. So that seems to be a very healthy kind of thing. So when we're talking about gratitude, it isn't just for material abundance. We have so much of that.
Much more than
much wider range of things, and a lot of that, I think, is captured by that notion of freedom, especially a broad notion of freedom that helps us to see our responsibilities as well as just the pure opportunity to create ourselves and our situation.
The other thing that was striking me is that perhaps especially certainly not just in the last couple of years, but certainly within your lifetime and my lifetime, just the awareness of the world dimension. It's certainly that Spaceship Earth piece is perhaps the newest element in it. But that conversations about how what's going on in Ethiopia are a part of the way we look at Thanksgiving. Those were not into our world with the immediacy, in the 40s when you and I were growing up, as it would have been today, and so that the very technological changes have affected the way we look at and get a handle on what we're celebrating there. Certainly, it's a piece that the Pilgrims or Lincoln, would not have been looking at. They would have been necessarily looking at it within very immediate personal experience. The communications revolution that has happened, our own personal experience has become much more than just the space immediately around us.
The communications revolution is a major part of this thing, I think. Television broadens out our views. Well, Chuck, we've been talking about the virtue of gratitude, sense of gratitude, and relating it to our great national holiday of Thanksgiving. I think that as Christian people, talking out of our perspective, we try to see this all in a faith context. And I think that part of what a Christian is able to do is to look at the ambivalence in the culture. My phrase is always, the cross is judge of the flag. We claim we have a higher perspective from which we look at our culture. And when we do that, it seems to me I see two things. I see a tremendous religious sentiment, sort of a quiet, deep religiousness connected with Thanksgiving that I often don't find in our other major holidays, precisely because they become even more commercialized and so on. So there clearly is this positive side, family gatherings. Some of our best memories are around that. And on the other hand, the cross tells us that there are distortions in the world scene, that others do not have the kind of affluence we do, and that we live in an interdependent world, and we're really called upon, therefore, to not feel guilty, but to do something constructive about it.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Father Chuck Ritter, director of the Office of Community Relations for the Catholic Diocese of Toledo. The topic of this week's Reflections was the celebration of Thanksgiving in a religious perspective. Comments or questions on this show or suggestions for future topics should be sent to Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Ministry, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio 43606. Funding for this program is provided by the Catholic Communications Campaign of the Diocese of Toledo.